Hello. Welcome to the stream. I think Simos has muted himself, so I will take over. And it is now your stream now belongs to me. Go for it, Simos.
You're absolutely welcome to it, Mark. I'll probably get more. I'll probably get more subscribers if you do it. Okay. Yes. Thank you very much. Welcome, everybody. I was muted, as was said. Andrew, the link is out there. Welcome to everybody, including my host, Xbox. Welcome, Xbox.
Hey.
And welcome, Jefferson. Thank you so much for coming on. The Spatchcock. And for those of you that are interested in getting cock points, go to Jeff's channel, and the first people that show up get 1,000 cock points. I think, is that right, Jeff?
If you say so, yeah. I'll just figure out how to account for those later. Yeah, sure.
It's what I'm saying. And of course, as always, welcome to Mark, our fantastic, intrepid debater who will take on anybody. Thank you to everybody. Big love to you, yes. William. Yes, you are a master. Yes. I didn't want to say it for sure. Obviously, welcome Lucky as well. Lucky, thank you. There we go. And we're welcomed also by Hillary. Thank you so much, Hillary's.
Rearrange my whole day just so I can be here.
Okay. Thank you very much indeed.
You're welcome.
Okay. So basically, today we're going to be talking about all things biblical. That's it. So all I'm going to say is thank God that YouTube is allowing me to be here. Or am I thanking God? Don't really know. That's the question we're going to be answering today. So over to the exact topic. I'd like to pass it over to the host, who is undoubtedly the biggest ex-Nilo we have in the chat. And that's you, Xbox. Thank you very much. Oh, and we got another person just joining us. It's the JD. Thank you, JD, for being here. I don't know if you know what the topic is. We were just about to share that. So welcome to the show anyway, and also welcome to Sandy. So over to you, Xbox. If you could just tell us what the hell's going on.
Yeah. We are talking about the flood, the Noah's flood, the God's flood. I don't know what to call it, the global flood, or
is it
anything around the Bible if we feel like it. That's pretty much the topic. Did it happen? Could it happen? Is any of it even possible?
I can answer that. No, it didn't.
Awesome.
Thanks everybody for coming to the show. That's really
it was just that easy.
We've had it head from somebody who is God himself in terms of YouTube and the great debate community, and that's wonderful.
Well, it's a pleasure to meet you, JD. I don't think I've met you before, and I'm sort of very new on the scene, so it's a pleasure to meet you. But run down the best reasons why. Like, obviously, we don't think it happened, but run down for us.
Well, before we go too deep into it, before that gets there, I just want to say
we're not doing that.
They're not going to go there just yet. I got a little bit more spiel to put out there because that's what I do.
You always do. You always do. There's no end.
There is no end. That's it. No,
there is no end.
Right. That's because anyway. So there are many types of floods. Let's just say that there are many types of gods. So when we say this topic, okay, we may jump around between the different variants. Is it global? Is it a local flood? Is it a global god? Is it a local god? These are some of the variants that we're going to try to take into account. So I just wanted to say that as a preface before the thing. But first, let's go traditional, and we will talk about the Noah flood myth, or is it, right? So go ahead, Mark. Now I've given you the intro.
I don't think anyone's got a problem with a local flood. Like, local floods happen all the time. I don't think anybody ever has got an issue with that. It's pretty mundane kind of thing. But the global flood is the one that sort of makes no sense whatsoever. But yeah, as I said, JD, you answered first. So what would be the top reasons for you? Not I'm forcing you to pick between a myriad here, but of course, but.
Oh, I mean, it's a laundry list, so it's kind of hard to. I don't know if there's a number one. There's a number like 1 through 30. Off the top of my head, no evidence that structures that would have been underwater at the time, like some of the most ancient pyramids and other things, ever were. No way to explain why we have living plant life if everything was underwater for a year. Trees can handle for a little bit, but if you completely cover a tree for a year, it's dead. And so is every other
massive floating plant mats.
You've also have the issue with saltwater and freshwater. The argument that everything was one or the other at the time is not backed up by just basic biology of these organisms. Certain fish they've been saltwater fish for a lot longer than there's ever been a flood. The fact that civilizations seem to have gone on unimpeded with a rich history that goes back from before the flood is alleged to have happened to after, and they seem to have just not noticed that they all died out and replaced by Jews, because the only one left is Noah's Jewish family, and they're the ones who had to repopulate the earth. There's no evidence of that. No evidence that in 6,000 years you can go from, I guess, Middle Eastern brown, whatever Noah's family would have been if they're Middle East, they'd be relatively brown skinned, to everything we have today. In fact, we have pretty strong evidence that everyone was originally black in Africa, and over like 80,000, 100,000 years, we branched out into the world, and that's when people, races started, color started to change, and so that there's no evidence of that happening. Genetics do not show a bottleneck within the last. Well, we have a bottleneck 80,000 years ago, I believe.
It was eight people on the ark.
Yeah, definitely not that. We were down to, I think, a couple thousand.
Yeah.
We were down to a couple thousand about 8,000 years ago from, I think, a volcanic activity. That's the hypothesis. No evidence of a genetic bottleneck of 8. We would not recover from that. We'd be like cheetahs today. We're knocked down to something like 10,000, and that is killing all the world's cheetahs. Like if you do a blood transfusion from one cheetah to another, it works no matter what. They don't have a blood type. Their blood type is all the same, because they're too similar, which means the diseases hit all of them, which means we're not going to have cheetahs for much longer. Humans got lucky in that we are bottleneck, but if we were down to 8, there's no recovering from that. Now, you can, of course, posit miracles. That's always the get out of jail free card of every theist. You can God is amazing. He can totally do it. Okay, I agree.
So there's a problem there.
And you've left the world of science and physics. You can't really just claim it's the case if all you got is the story.
Well,
you don't have the evidence.
That's not the problem. The problem is, if you're doing miracles, then why bother with a flood? Like, why not just, or why bother having Noah build a boat in the first place? Like, if you're doing miracles, you might as well just, sort of take all the people away and not bother with the flood and the boat.
Yeah. Well, there's a whole lot of why bother with when it comes to deities, especially the ones, if you go with the ones that we're talking about, Christian, Islam, the ones that have unlimited or near unlimited abilities, can't lie, but other than that, everything's on the board. There's really not a lot makes sense of the world. That's why apologetics exists. Apologetics exist to explain why, despite seeing things we shouldn't see if God exists, he totally exists anyway. And then they try and explain why. It tends to not work very well. It's just. I mean, why have a material world at all if the goal is people in souls out in heaven? Why even have the test phase? Why bother? That's a whole different That's a whole different conversation. No. As for the flood, why? Hey, Floyd. You got to bring Floyd on here, by the way. If Floyd ever came in here, he'd kick my ass on this.
Oh yeah, he jumps in all the time. If he has time, he'll jump in.
He wins on eloquence. I win on verbiage. I can talk longer. I can get more out faster. Floyd takes his time. So what's the last bit? There's really no reason to why kill people by drowning. Like, you're supposed to be a decent God. I mean, sure, all loving, whatever, but at least you kind of hope God is not outright evil. Well, drowning the thing he says, the world, all the people were evil. Like all of them, like little 10-year-old and the 12-year-old and the 80-year-old and the 60-year-old.
Newborn babies.
And the people with families, they were just evil across, like so much sin. That's
Well, the
likely. Even if
argument-
we grant that, you've still got babies. You've got pregnant women. You have people
Well,
who
the
are, by
argument that
definition,
I've
innocent
heard.
unless you're a Calvinist. If you're a Calvinist, okay. fine.
You don't know the
People are-
closed womb argument, do you?
Well,
Yeah.
the argument that I've heard is that God knew that those babies would grow up to do horrendous things. It's sort of a Nazi in the womb kind of argument, kind of thing, right? That
case,
God knows that they're going to
they
be
haven't done
insanely
it
evil.
yet. They haven't done
Right,
it,
right.
right?
Which
And
sort of
we look
goes
nowadays,
against
we try to
our
judge
ideas of actions.
Everybody
of
loves
things
the
that-
horrendous babies argument. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the
Yeah.
Calvinists will do that. But you really only hear Calvinists do that. The rest of them are like, yeah, no, babies are innocent, and so I'm sure God did some nice thing. Or
Well, no,
they just embrace
no,
Calvinism
that's
and say,
not-
oh no, he drowned them because they deserved it. Bunch of damn darn.
Oh, I'm
Well,
sure
they had it
Jefferson's
coming.
heard the closed womb argument.
But anyway, it's just, even if you go with that, you're still going with drowning as your choice. Why drown?
Yeah.
Why not blink them out? So the very fact that they're flooding in the first place is already a problem. And of course, I mean,
Well, that I can answer.
when it comes to physics, well,
That's-
I'll wrap up because I can do this for hours. I'll wrap up and say
that's so that God would have that option taken off the table for the future. He can't send a flood anymore. He can only send fire.
yeah, because being with his abilities has emotions and has hissy fits and is bothered by things and is upset
He
about
needs
things
reminders,
that are going
too.
to happen, right?
Yeah, he also needs rainbows to be like a post-it note to remind him, no more flooding. Already
Yeah.
did that.
It kind of
And that-
shows that the
that
God
always-
they worship back then is really nothing like the modern complex theological varieties we have today. Like
Right.
what they worship back then, they did not have complex philosophies about their gods. It was more likely, I mean, we kind of could see, like, I'm getting off topic here. This is actually Floyd's thing. Floyd's really good at this. So let me go back to the physics real quick and then I'll wrap up. Pretty much all the flood models that have been put forth so far, there's about 4 or 5 of them. Kent Hovind's got his. There's another one involving, he does the whole ice sheets thing about the Earth. Other ones have done, well, it just came up from we found water and rocks deep in the Earth, so it came from there. All of those involve physics that kill them. So you're going to sanitize the planet no matter what. And in fact, the Institute for Creation Research hired the RATE group, the RATE, the RATE group. I can't remember what the RATE stands for. And even in their official report, they came up with that they had no solution to to decay rates. That the fact that to speed up the decay rates that they matched today would produce enough radiation to kill everyone. So they say, well, the Bible does have to be literally true in all its ways. So what happened is God made it so that wasn't an issue during the flood.
Yeah, God miracled it, right?
No mention of it in the Bible. No reason to think it's the case, except it's the only way to make the physics work with what we observe today. Now, at that point, they kind of admit, listen, we kind of gave up. We wanted to come up with a sort of secular sort of way, but you know what? We're pre-suppers. We've got on our webpage. Mm-hmm. It has to be this way. Therefore, this is what had to have happened. At that point, I think in the conversation, you've kind of given up at that point. Like, oh, well,
the heat problem isn't just during the flood. That's the thing. The heat problem is something that applies because the Earth is supposed to be so young, 6,000 years. Recently, the Kent Hovindites, most notably Standing for Truth, Donnie came out sort of propping up Professor McQueen, David McQueen, who's a geologist with the Creation Ministry. So he came out saying that he had solved the heat problem. The only problem with that is that it requires the rate of radiometric decay to change, which then violates all physics. So they quietly wrapped that up, deleted the video saying that he had solved the heat problem, and sort of shuffled it off. Now, Hovind's got his solution to the heat problem, which is just this ridiculous ice dome, which is just the most insane thing you've ever heard of to cool down the Earth, which sort of wouldn't work for a start. Because you're sort of putting a solid barrier over the Earth that would probably increase the heat, even if it was ice, because he doesn't understand how thermodynamics works, and like the impracticality of an ice dome is just ridiculous. So you covered a lot of different arguments there. I think also. I'll just mention a couple that weren't covered. One of them is biodiversity. koalas getting back from the Ark to Australia with no eucalyptus anywhere in between. So how exactly that works? Sloths getting back to South America. How does that work? There's also the anthropological, basically civilizations. How did, if you take an internal critique, how did humans create the Tower of Babel like 100 years after the flood? Right, so you have 8 people. 100 years later, they're building the biggest tower to heaven the world's ever seen. How does that work? As well as sort of about 150 years later, the Akkadian kingdom existed, millions of people, in maybe a couple of million people in that kingdom. That was Sargon's kingdom, or empire rather, the Sargonian Empire. How did 8 people get to million in 150 years? Is a good question. It's one that Josh brings up a lot. Incest, yeah, an insane amount of incest. You're right, Christopher. Yeah, you're absolutely right.
Well, that's backed by the Bible, though. The incest, it actually is, but it would have to be an insane amount of incest to get the numbers you're talking about.
Yeah, I do like the animals one. That it's like, how are kangaroos getting from Australia to there and back? And everything Pangea was 4,000 years ago. Okay, well, I think some of the civilizations might have mentioned that, not just the Jews. I think maybe China was thriving, Vietnam thriving, Australia, they've got writings, they've got their own carvings.
Japan.
One of them said, hey, there's this moment before we all died from being flooded. We also noticed that we could just walk from here to anywhere with ease, and then suddenly all that moved. And for some reason, the physicists of that didn't, again, raise the temperature to the point where the entire planet is sanitized of life.
Yeah.
Like we have plate tectonics now. We kind of know how they move. Like they don't move like that. That would be bad. And there's also no reason for that. There's not in the Bible. There's no Pangea in the Bible. There's Eden, and no one says Eden was before that. So it just there's so many different angles. The flood is probably, I think, most people's favorite attack on fundamentalist Christianity because it's so easy. There's more complex stuff that you can go after, like evolution. You got to learn a little bit of evolution. You want to go up to Big Bang Theory, you've got to learn a little bit of physics. You really don't know much of anything to go after the flood. It's so clearly made up. I get it. I mean, back then they didn't know how anything worked, and the more gullible, the more ignorant we are, the more we tend to kind of make up ideas that make us feel better about how the world is. So that's the naturalist explanation for this, and I think that makes the most sense. But
let's not forget that it's not the first global flood story that came.
Yeah,
out.
by no means, right?
Right. So there's the Epic of Gilgamesh, which had a global flood story. There was the it was I can't remember the name of it. I should know this. It's too early in the morning. But there was 2 others that came from Mesopotamia that had these flood narratives in, and the overlaps between them are incredibly surprising. Like, for instance, in the Epic of Gilgamesh, he releases birds to try and find land, kind of thing. Like, it actually, the parallels are actually startling. So if you actually look into these, you've got 2 scenarios that God flooded the world, and presumably multiple times, or that a story about a flood has just been, sort of made more grandiose as time goes on. Oh, I think JD came.
It just might have crashed. But just to say that there is a link in the description that Fabio gave me earlier of local flood myths from around the world. Okay, so if you want to just go and click on that, you should find at least something about them.
They love to point to China and stuff recorded a flood, right? But the problem with that it was the flooding of the Yellow River, which wasn't supposed to be a global flood. Like, the Chinese never recorded it as a global flood. It was just the Yellow River flooded particularly bad, and there was sort of a lot of mythology about it. But it was never sort of, hey, this wiped out the civilization. It's baffling to hear them say, oh, well, they have flood stories as well. And it's like, yeah, local flood stories, not global ones. And if it was a Oh, somebody's keyboard is aggressively loud. I don't know who that is.
That's me. I just realized it was muted.
You need a filter, my friend. You need a filter. Have
Oh
you
no,
got
it's
them
this
muted?
wonderful blue clicky keys. They have wonderful sound, but not so much when
Yeah, I had a problem with it. Have you got a
I was
have you
gonna
got
say
an
that.
NVIDIA card?
Keep doing it, JD. Keep doing
Yeah,
it. It
that's
makes
right.
you
Everybody,
sound like
that's
a
right.
reporter
Okay,
from the
let's see.
70s.
I was going to
No, like-
send this thing
One-
over to
One
I
thing I
just
will
don't stay muted. So
one thing I will just say is if that isn't the best trolling device in a debate that you can possibly get. Anyway, moving on.
well, it's just distracting. It's not distracting, is it?
No, it's not distracting
yeah,
at
not
all.
at all.
But I remember certain people using it in debates just to piss people off. So.
Oh, really?
Wow,
Anyway.
that is
JD,
harsh.
can you send me a link for the exact keyboard that you're using? Because if I ever have a discussion with like Darth Dawkins or any of these pre-subs, I want to be able to use that exact keyboard noise.
Oh,
over
done
there.
and done. It's,
Okay, yeah,
it's
send that in the
You
private.
look-
chat. I will buy that on that.
DOS keyboard, DAS. That's the
Yeah,
name of
thank
it.
you.
My keyboard's probably
It's built
worse,
like a
but
brick.
I've got
The
a.
thing is a solid block. It's wonderful.
Yeah, I have one called Yoda that's made it's
It weighs
like
like
that.
6 pounds.
Yeah.
6
Hold on,
pounds.
let me-
Yeah, looks like the 80s. It's perfect. Yeah,
Let me turn my filter off. Hang on.
You
will
should just
say
make a
on the-
soundboard. The
sorry.
soundboard of the clicky keyboard. Go ahead.
Yeah, see, look, you see
Like-
the width of it here. It's just like, good lord, it's a block.
Yep.
Yeah, I was gonna say on the argument that we find flood myths around the world, therefore there must have been a global flood kind of seems off to me because I mean rivers are found all across the world and civilizations tend to be found close to rivers that typically flood part of the year, so that doesn't seem terribly suspicious.
Well, nobody's arguing that local floods don't happen. Hey, Maori.
Hello, everyone.
No,
Okay.
but nobody's
Dude,
arguing that.
your hair, it's.
Oh, but yeah, but that I think the point was that.
What happened?
Oh yeah.
I've got the atheist hairstyle, right?
Mhm.
I've seen Richard Dawkins live. I don't think he's rocking that yet. It's not yet.
No, but isn't that the joke? Like, atheism is a religion, like baldness is a hairstyle or a hair
Oh,
color.
yeah.
It is a
I was-
hairstyle. It's not a hair color.
I thought you were going to go into it means I need to wear a cap indoors, which means you're a liar according to I think
Or a
it was
flat
Neo,
earther,
was it?
maybe.
Or
Oh
someone.
goodness, that's a deep
But
cut.
gonna have a banner that says "No God, no hair."
Yeah, but
Shaving his
what
eyebrows
An-
too.
what
No, I'm just
Andrews
trying to be like
was
Mark
saying.
Reed.
Mhm.
On the mat.
Atheist debaters have no hair. I got to say, all the best ones, Delahunty.
If you want to be an
The
atheist,
master
you're
debaters.
rocking a Dillahunty. That'll work.
Well,
Yeah,
I would say the weak atheists have strong, no hair, but the strong atheists.
The weak
Well,
atheist,
well-
strong debaters.
Well,
Um,
that might be the case. I'm not saying the debate qualities. I'm just saying strong atheists have long hair in general.
I see you.
Stop.
That's Farm. Good to see you.
The strong atheists have long, flowing hair and Giga Chad Thundercocks as opposed to the
Good Chad.
Yeah.
Jefferson, you are so hip with the lingo. I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like what do we even mean by weak and strong atheists these days? Because the definition they're so fluid still.
Oh, good God! Don't go into that.
No, I'm not going to Steve up the room. It's okay.
It already did
Atheism
in
is
one
just
of
a
our
social
hangouts.
construct anymore. So
Although, if you want, I can link you all to my published works in the Journal of J.D. Kane is awesome. You should pay him money.com. And
Sounds
it's
great.
very popular there. I mean, everyone who was on that site was like, "It's the best thing I've ever read." So good.
But wait a second. Is it on
Is there
Google
a
Scholar?
shorter? Is
Is
there
it
a shorter
referenced on
name for that? Is
Google
it just JD Kane?
No, because they're anti-me. It's all those darn weak atheists who are just fighting me off on Google Scholar.
Makes
they're-
sense.
They're blacklisting me.
Sounds
It's
legit.
terrible. But Doe, you check my YouTube channel and my page, jdkaneisthebest.com.
It's
There you go.
award winning from what I heard.
On the site, you got a gold
I mean,
star.
I invented the award that it won, but award winning nonetheless.
Maudy,
Yeah,
do you
promote
anybody
all you
that's
want.
good at website design? Because JD Kane has just inspired me. I want a website called JeffersonSpatchcockistheworst.com, and then we can just kind of do an opposite version of this,
Oh, that's fantastic.
like a pity channel. This dude can't. Yeah, he can't hang. He can't do it. Yeah.
Probably has
So
short
pitiful.
hair.
He's got he shaves. Yeah, he doesn't trim his neck hair, but he shaves his head. He's fucking awful. Yeah, that kind of stuff.
I always thought you were a neckbeard, Jeff. I always thought you were.
That was such a specific picture to paint. He doesn't trim his neck hair.
Yeah, he's got he got all this neck hair and stuff, and like a neck
Are you
beard.
making fun of me right now? What's happening?
No. I'm talking about back.
No, neck
No,
beard.
this is not
Very
an anti-Italian thing, Mouty. Don't turn this into that.
Oh,
We can do that later. We'll do that later.
No.
Two aren't
How did
mutually
we
exclusive.
get from the flood to neck hair?
Well,
I mean, you can
they're
drown
both miraculous.
in neck hair like you can drown in floodwater.
Yeah, they are both miraculous.
Well,
because when you drown,
also-
you're up to here in water.
Also, it's a bit lazy to keep the neck hair, and it's also very lazy of God not to make Noah do all that work.
There's the segue, ladies and
There
gentlemen.
it is. God,
Wow,
Okay,
that
so-
is an
Simos
amazing.
is
Yeah,
an
no, I'd
artist.
pay
He is
that.
an artist.
So we're back to Noah, and
Nobody
you know,
cares who
basically-
Noah. It's a fucking twat.
Well, no, Andrew was making a point about the civilizations tend to live by areas of water, right? To get their water. So, I mean, a lot of them are going to have recorded floods, if not all.
A flood's going to be a huge event in the new
Yeah.
burgeoning civilizations that happen to be accumulating
Yeah.
around water, right?
Exactly.
course.
Yeah.
The other thing I kind of wonder about this with literature, I don't know enough people that enough scholars that kind of study this stuff, but I know flood narratives go back to Atrahasis and all these other kinds of guys. But I kind of wonder, out of communities like Egypt, where they're living along a Nile Delta, and the flooding is necessary, kind of regular flooding is necessary for their agricultural cycle. I always kind of wondered if the flooding narrative was sort of a worst case scenario story. We get this situation where enough water comes up, floods some stuff, and then it recedes, and then we can plant things, and we get good benefit. What if it goes wrong? What if it gets wrathful? What if it turns? I always kind of wondered to what extent in the ancient Near Eastern culture, narratives based on that were sort of like kind of a projection of fears about the insecurities around that kind of agriculture, as opposed to just being there was some kind of miraculous, some kind of crazy event. Because I think some people think there probably was some kind of massive ass flood or something, and then a lot of these cultures kind of picked up on this kind of story and then passed it around. And I'm like, yeah, maybe, but maybe there never was that. Maybe it was just sort of a
OG preppers is kind of what you're.
kind of a collective
Ancient Near East preppers.
Yeah, kind of a collective paranoia that just kind of got passed down and got spread around.
I don't think a lot of these, we're sort of looking at that through the lens of current understanding, Jeff. I don't think a lot of these civilizations, particularly, well foresighted, cast an eye over to Pompeii kind of thing. They certainly wouldn't have expected that.
But that's what I mean. Wouldn't that have increased their anxiety? Because after a while, even within a few generations, they experience that kind of stuff over time, and they're like, "This is relatively regular." But at the same time, they're like, "Well, hey, who knows how this works? This could go wrong at any point."
Not necessarily. If you think there's a benign river god that keeps, sort of pushing forth the waters so that your harvest can come up, kind of thing, you might never have that idea that it could turn disastrous. Like you may think of it as some sort of benevolent force kind of thing. It might actually, and then when that occurs, well, what's happened? If you already believe there's a benign God creating this food for you by sort of doing this, then it may be an easy jump to do to say, hey, that God's now angry. You've made that God mad, right? And then now they're using the thing that they used to have benign to punish you.
Mark, what are you pushing back against real quick again?
I think because if you don't mind me saying, Mark, I think the assumption that I think he's making, I'm making an assumption that they're making an observation from nature, and I think what he's saying is they're making an observation from the assumption of something divine, and they're
the authors of these stories.
Yeah, they're getting a good thing from this kind of agriculture, and then when they cease to get it, or they get the opposite, which is flooding, that's the God being wrathful.
Well, I think you're sort of proposing that the flood is sort of them having foresight to what could happen rather than what did happen. And I guess sort of from a sort of abductive argument, sort of just a probabilistic argument, I think it's more probable that they observe these events and then fit that into their understanding, their religious understanding of what causes the events in the first place.
But also, lore is the first version of history, right? So in order to prepare yourself, because not many people read, keeping these stories alive was a reminder that, like, hey, the season's coming up where this thing happens, or it might happen, or is probably going to happen. So I don't understand what the like is it the argument of either they're making an observation about nature and have no forethought about some kind of theistic creature, or is your argument, Mark, like, no, it's baked into it that these stories involve
I think it's more likely that these flood stories are experiences of actual events that have been mythologized rather than a observation of benign events that they're afraid it's going to get out of control. I think that's more likely. That's just me personally. I totally understand where Jeff's coming from.
Yeah, I guess that's where, because what I'm thinking is, like, I can understand, like, for me, if you have an entire agriculture system that's based on a semi-regular flooding and recession event, the idea that could or couldn't happen, I think would probably engender a certain amount of anxiety in the population. And if something interrupted it, prolonged it, protracted it, whatever, that would create this kind of stuff. So to me, the idea of them creating a narrative around the idea of an exaggerated event, like too much flooding or no flooding at all, doesn't seem like it's that big of an exaggeration. That they could have come up with a story like, well, this is what happened. Now, I'm not saying that is what happened. I'm just saying that the fact that this was so widespread in ancient Near Eastern, mythology, even in places probably where there wasn't really a flood recession kind of agriculture. I mean, in places like, along the Tigris and Euphrates, maybe they were doing kind of something similar to like what Egypt was doing, but it seems like it could have happened without them having to experience something close to the real deal. It could have just been kind of a collective anxiety of, hey, what if this went the wrong way just once and it flooded and it never went away and it just kept going? Like that kind of anxiety seems to be pretty in keeping with like human nature and our tendency to like kind of overreact.
It's like the cautionary tale phenomenon.
Yeah, I actually disagree with the idea that there was any kind of flood that it was based on. I think rather it's more likely that we all as humans have like a understandable fear of drowning. That's just a very common fear of people. Anyone who's seen drowners, just choking on a little bit of water is enough to make you freak out. Like, oh God, what if that kept going? And I think the story simply plays on that fear to tell a tale that is meant to keep people in line. Like, here's how bad it could get. Who runs everything? It gets this bad. I believe these areas did have flooding issues, but I don't think that's what they base the stories on. I think they base the story is. I want to say made up, but the thing is, the difference back then between fiction and nonfiction isn't like what we have today. Remember, you don't have stenographers. People are just getting oral traditions down that are just make a mess of. So it was common for people to write down what they thought. So that it would be considered fiction to say, here's a story that based on what I think this character is like, they would have said something like this.
Yeah.
It'd be like if you took Abraham Lincoln's speeches, you've never heard them, but you heard he was like this, and he said something about slavery that was bad. And so you just came up with something that sounded like what someone like him would have said, and that would just become the story. And that was not considered a lie back then. Nowadays it would be. I'd be like, okay, you've noticed the case.
That's sort of the way Deuteronomy is constructed that way.
Yeah, I'd like to just say a couple of things, if I may, here quickly, which is to say, okay, so there's a difference between, I believe in the Old Testament, there was a difference between some of the stories that come from the southern tribe, which is Judea, and the northern tribe, which is the Israelites. And I think the flood myth is an Israelite myth, and it comes from the captivity from when they were in Babylon. So it's written after 500. And I think there is a lot of evidence that there were regular floods down the Euphrates, which endangered populations because it destroyed crops, etc., etc. And there's a lot of evidence by way of them, building ziggurats, and secondly, or building their temples, etc., on their cities on mounds, which were bricked around the outside, and those bricks at the bottom were tarred. So I think there is some serious evidence that they were protecting themselves against floods, at least the cities. And also the other thing is that these floods would have quite often changed the course of the rivers themselves. And that is really the fear side of it, as far as I could tell, which was to say, like if the river that you just based all your irrigation on moved, you'd have to then, re-irrigate your fields again. That could take some time. So that the original myth, right, or what it is, the Impishima or whatever his name is, myth, is clearly mythological because it's angels talking to walls and walls talking to people, right? So clearly there is some supernatural efficiency going on there, which is made up. But of course, it reflects the reality of the life in the region. And that's when it comes. Sorry, when it comes to the Bible. Let me finish up. When it comes to the Bible, that's almost directly imported, and that fear, as you say, J.D. Kane, is the main kind of instrument that is trying to be dictated. Look, God is all powerful. And we should fear this, and that this myth previously applies to us. That's how important we are. Go ahead.
I still think that fear was probably based upon real events, though. Apparently, the Tigris and Euphrates flood nearly every single year, based upon sort of water melting from sort of mountains in Anatolia.
But when do you go from exaggeration to just straight up fabrication? Like you could say it's like they had some floods, but they were well aware nothing ever covered the top mountaintops, and it surely didn't last for that long and wipe out everything. So clearly, there's a lot that was added to. If you take real events and you add that much to it, I think at that point you would just call it exaggeration. Like, okay, you're basically you had something as like an idea, but what you've come up with is nothing like that anymore. You've kind of gone so far beyond it.
I don't know about that, because if it's a collective enough idea in people's heads that they live and survive by the ebb and flow of these rivers, and a lot of early civilizations either settled along a coast or settled along a river. The idea of creating a mythology about a story like the flood would actually impact most people really hard, especially like if you didn't really have any evidence that it actually did happen, but you're like, yeah, there was this massive flood that happened. And even if amongst them they wanted to debate amongst themselves, like, oh, was it for a region or the entire planet, the known world? Like, they didn't know what a sphere was or an obloid. They didn't know what the planet was. It would be easy to make kind of hyperbolic suggestions in a story and say this is something that happened. So I think they
if it's everybody right? If it's literally everybody that is basically the entire world to you.
Yeah, exactly. But the idea of saying it doesn't necessarily have to be an exact event in order to appeal to the fear of the projected event. It's a projected fear that is in people's minds because they understand that these rivers flow, they ebb and flow, and they flood. And part of that flooding is necessary, and they probably have an experience at times when they flooded too much and they caused damage, or they did something they weren't supposed to. And then the idea of just kind of exaggerating that with hyperbolic language and saying, oh, well, imagine that they flooded so much that they covered the tops of the mountains, and this was God's wrath upon the earth, blah, 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 blah. And that, people could get that. They could get the kind of morale of that story, and that would kind of work. Now, I don't know if experts in ancient Near Eastern literature think that that's kind of how they did this, but there's enough. I have read enough to know that enough of them know that.
Were you watching TikToks? Yeah.
Those kinds of stories existed throughout those kind of cultures, and they seem to be based on a shared understanding of kind of flood agriculture and stuff. So,
well, I think it's more likely that sort of an event happened that was particularly bad flood, and a story is passed along that becomes greater and greater in each telling. Like sort of if somebody says, hey, it flooded all the lands kind of thing, or it flooded, everybody I knew's land. And then that's told us that flooded all the lands. And then it flooded the entire country. And then it flooded the because I think if you look back on the Atrahasis and things like that, they weren't global floods. And it's sort of very obvious that the stories of the Epic of Gilgamesh, the flood, and the Bible flood is drawn from those earlier stories. But the earlier stories, I don't think, and I would have to check that, I don't think they were global floods. I think they were just floods that covered all of the lands, kind of thing. So I don't see it as a great stretch for there to be a particularly bad flood. And every sort of generation tells about this flood, and it becomes bigger and bigger and bigger until it gets to the Bible, and it's the entire world. So it goes from the villages, all the lands around the village, to all the lands around the country, to all the lands around the everywhere, sort of thing, to the entire world. And once it becomes the entire world, it becomes ludicrous. But that's the way that stories grow. That's the mythology. Yeah.
So now that we've been talking about whether or not it could or could not have happened, we're going to get to the central question: should a god have done it?
Well, before we get there, sorry to make another slight diversion, which is to say hello to Floyd. And we were talking. I was talking at least a bit anyway about the two kind of tribes of Israel and the influence that might have. Is that anything to do with what you were saying about there's two flood narratives? And if not, what do you mean by two flood narratives, please?
Yeah, it's part of the documentary hypothesis. There's a P story, the priestly source, and the J source, Jehovah's source. I believe let me look it up real quick. The J source, I believe, comes from the Northern Kingdom. Let me see if I can look that up real quick. Once the Northern Kingdom, once the Southern Kingdom, what happens is
Israelites are the northern and the Judeans are the southern.
The J source is actually Southern Kingdom of Judah, and the E source is the North Kingdom of Israel. The P source actually
that's the priestly source.
Babylonian exile, and that's where they would have been influenced by the Babylonianness and so forth, and the Epic of Gilgamesh. But they had these separate stories, and they're all considered sacred, right? So they want to get rid of any of them. So what do? They mash them together. I can do a quick slide. This is a slide deck I debated years ago. I don't know if you remember. I think his name's Rob, General Han Solo. We had a debate on whether the Bible describes a worldwide flood or a local flood, and I argued for a worldwide flood. So this is where.
Yeah, just share it for me, and I'll put it up on the main screen.
Yeah, let me see here. Anyway, this is just one deck.
I'll add something if it's not in your deck there. So I'll wait to see what's on there.
I've never seen anything like it. Oh, there we go.
There we go. Yeah, so I mean, an easy way to tell the different sources or look how it addresses God. The P source will address God as Elohim, and the J source will refer to God as the Lord, which is Yahweh. But here the difference is the J source will refer to God as Yahweh. There's 7 pairs of clean and unclean animals, which is interesting because what's clean and unclean is not really defined until Moses gets the law. So it's
it's always the same thing. Clean is beef, unclean is rabbits and goats.
Yeah. For the last 40 days and 40 nights, Noah sends out a dove, and it depicts a more anthropomorphic God that grieves and regrets, personally closes the ark, and smells Noah's sacrifice. Where the P source refers to God as Elohim. It's one pair of each kind of aminal. Can't say that. Flow lasted 370 days. And Noah sends out a raven, and it depicts more of a transcendent controller of the universe, which is a later source later the source, the more God becomes more transcendent and less personal, so forth. So those are the two sources. If you want to identify, you can do a Google search if you want to identify which verses fall under which source.
Yeah, most of it's in Genesis. Just for anybody.
Yeah. So the documentary hypothesis addresses the Pentateuch, which is the first 5 books of the Bible. So obviously, the Noah flood story would be included in that. But yeah, I mean, a lot of people aren't aware, especially fundamentalists aren't aware that there are actually 2 separate flood stories, woven together. And you'll notice if you read the story, it's like why is it repeating itself? Yeah, because it's because there's 2 stories. It's repeating itself because both stories have similar themes and so forth. So so when you read it, it does seem to kind of be repeating itself, which is interesting. So I just wanted to share that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's good.
Which is there any distinction between local and global there in those myths? Is there one which points towards global and one which points towards local? Or are they both just?
No. I think both presuppose and describe a worldwide flood. That was my debate with Rob, because scientifically you can't support a worldwide flood, right? So some Christians will say, "Oh, it was just a local flood," and so forth. But no, the story doesn't make sense if it's a local flood. If it's a local flood, why would Noah need to build an ark? I mean, they can just travel, go over a mountain or whatever.
And it talks about cleansing the earth.
Yeah, right. Are evil people only within the Palestinian area? I mean, they're only
maybe they all moved to Palestine to
they're only in the Levant. I mean, it makes no sense theologically and so forth. And of course, they had a different view of cosmology back then, right? They believed in a flat Earth with a solid dome firmament above it. Where people think it's a local Earth, they're saying, well, it can't be that because the Earth's a globe and it doesn't work out and so forth. Well, they didn't have that view. They thought the Earth was much smaller. They thought it was flat with a dome over it and so forth. So a worldwide flood would only, in their minds, would just flood out the whole entire Earth within their area because that's all they knew.
And it's not just like there's a myriad of problems. I mean, I'm an engineer at heart, so I think that the entire idea of having a wooden ship that big just doesn't work. You can't build a ship of the proportions that it's stated and it not take on water. They built a ship that was similar size called the Wyoming, that only kept the calm waters and sort of the coastline, and it had bilge pumps. That's the thing. Like, you will need bilge pumps in order to pump the water out if you make a wooden ship that size. There's no question, because of the torsion on the beams. Like it doesn't work even on an engineering perspective. Like, it just doesn't. We do have barges, wooden barges that size, but they have bilge pumps in them. So the question becomes of then logistics and manpower. Like, how do you run a ship that size and which is also a floating zoo with 8 people?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you to Mark for this particular meme. Okay, it's much appreciated.
Well, clearly the elephants must have been the bilge pumps. They must have been using their noses to suck up all the water and spill it out.
But God designed them for just that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, what's the design that Hovind, I think it was, could come up with, where the
moon
has
pool.
the pump in the middle? Yeah, moon pools.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The real trick.
I don't know if anyone's explained to them what happens when you put like a moon pool in a wooden ship. Like, but
But I mean,
it doesn't end well.
The question that I have now is that were there 2 elephants, and those were sufficient to provide the the bilge pumping for that ark, or was it 7 pairs?
It was definitely 7 pair.
It was definitely okay. So we got to go with
So
the one
elephants
source,
are a
not the other.
clean animal. Okay, I didn't know that.
Yeah, they-
We learned
all
something
the
new.
forage for them just like was floating on the top of the water, so that's how they were
They-
able to.
They rotated them out.
They got
Yeah.
their nutrients by sucking up seawater from the bottom of the ark and spitting it over the top. Yeah, they were fine.
Well, see, that's another
Yeah.
thing with the myth is that it talks about when it cleanses the earth. It kind of mentions that it wipes out everything that's living.
Yeah.
In the flood in the water. So all the fish, the mammals, the plant life.
Yeah, that
every bit of it would have been cleansed out.
yeah,
So
that
it's like-
removed special whales helping to keep that big wooden boat afloat.
Yeah.
Well, okay, so it doesn't say everything that's living from memory. It says everything that walks on the ground. So
Yeah.
that's
No.
that's open to a lot of interpretation right there, because
I'll find it.
um
I'll give you exactly what it says.
Sorry, it's just come up on the screen. That's what a local flood would look
Local
like.
flood.
The Bible.
well and
I like how it comes to an abrupt stop right there on that hillside right there. That's great.
Here, I'll send rain on the earth for 40 days and 40 nights, and it will wipe from the face of the earth every living creature I have made.
Yeah, that's why I put on the meme that I did as the thumbnail. Like, God's so lazy. Look, he's gone to all this trouble to
Which
save all
verse
of these
is that?
animals, and yet look what else he's doing. He's flooding the entire earth.
Exactly.
Which verse is that, Xbox?
Genesis, it is 4.
Oh, sorry.
Let's see, chapter 7, verse 4.
Is that a J source or a P source?
Oh,
I don't know.
Yeah. No.
What am I? It's
We gotta get a Hebrew Bible.
NIV, but I'm not sure what.
The interesting thing is, like, if you talk to somebody who specializes in Hebrew Bible, like a Joel Baden or something like that, or J.J. Collins, or John Collins, they're the way they end up talking about these kinds of differences, they're very cool about the whole thing. They're like, yeah, they got these stories, and yeah, they have these variations, and they might be attributed to some of these traditions, but who the hell knows?
Right.
Like, that's sort of like the
and Floyd's got it pulled up too, where it says that it covers all the mountains and everything like that.
Yeah.
But it gives you the one of the sources gives you exactly how high the water is in cubits.
Yep.
And it would actually only be like 20, 30 feet high.
Yep.
Around the whole world.
Yeah.
Which I'm not sure all the mountains would be 20, 30 feet
well,
high.
when you're pinching a mountain between thumb and forefinger in the distance, look, that's as high as the water needs to be, right?
Right.
Well, I had a question for Hovland in my last debate against him, which was, how did the bees survive in particular? Right, so you've got bees. Okay, they need flowers to be able to collect nectar. How did the bees survive? Because if they're on the ark, you would need to provide them with flowers. How does this work?
They nested in the ears of elephants.
No. It's the first example of early evolution. Is the termites that were in the gopher wood, and they evolved really quickly into bees when they landed.
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go.
Okay,
no,
so
the flowers is not the.
I come back to slideshows. I know Floyd has joined. Hey, Floyd.
Thank you. We have a question. We have a question.
One
How
guy
did
overprepared.
we have a question. How did insects survive the flood? Especially since I've heard some Christians claim that they don't have the breath of life.
Yes. So the flood says that everything with the breath of life on land died.
Right.
So they sort of say, well, insects didn't have the breath of life. So the Bible isn't saying that the insects died. Now, I've heard a couple of things for that. Number one, insects were on the ark is the really quick and easy kind of, it raises more questions that it solves, but some creationists say that. Some say that they survived on floating mats of vegetation. If you can pass that one.
or dead
that
people,
there
or
were.
Is that the same as like the monkeys, floating across reed mats from Southeast Asia to South America?
Yeah, doesn't that bump into the
Well,
problem
I
of the
mean,
sheer
yeah.
quantity of water that would have been moving? Like, how are insects going to stay in the air when they're living it with like multiple inches of water per second?
Exactly.
Like, besides
why
the fact that Noah drowned while staying on the boat, the bugs aren't going to do much better.
Yeah, why
what
couldn't
was
humans
your
have
next
grabbed
point,
something
Mark?
afloat? Why couldn't humans have grabbed something that float?
Well, I mean,
Well,
for a
they
year,
kind of did.
it's just,
Yeah.
it's kind of hard to eat.
And
Really.
how do you deal
I
with
mean,
all
like
the
other dead
rainwater
people?
coming into the
Yeah.
boat? Like, that's a substantial amount of rainwater falling on the boat. Was the boat completely covered? Like, how there's a lot of questions.
Right.
But the insects, I've heard a number of different things for the insects. Most generally, that the floating mat hypothesis is generally the one I hear the most.
Right.
Floating
Well,
mats.
you brought up another problem with it when you said the flowers with the bees. This is off
Yeah.
insects, but
Mhm.
People bring up the food source, right? That would have had to been there for
Yep.
the animals. And if
Yes.
you look at just the herbivores, the things that would be eating grass and things like that,
Yep.
you not only have to have since everything else is wiped off the face of the earth that's living. I don't know if they consider plants living or not, but it wouldn't matter because the flood would still wipe the plant life out. You not only have to have a food source for the animals while they're on the ark, but you would have to have a food source for them once the floodwaters have gone down. I mean, for years you would have to be feeding them as new plant life grew, unless you just go back to claiming miracle.
Well, I think they don't think it wiped out plant life, kind of thing. I think they sort of have this idea that it plants can survive that kind of, which they can't. Like if you
that's what I'm
flood the
saying, yeah.
world in water, sunlight cannot reach down to the plants at the bottom. Like it just, you're talking about if it rises beyond the tops of Everest, then your ordinary sort of sea level is not going to get sunlight, not enough to sustain plants at any rate. So how this works, we've got no idea how those plants survive, but generally that's what I've been told, that the plants would survive.
Well, I mean, what about the salt water mixing? Right.
They'd say it's fresh water.
Right.
The springs of the deep were fresh water, not salt.
Yeah. So the fresh water comes up and then mixes with the salt water because it's a global flood, and it all becomes saline. So we've got a year to have this happen, right? Okay.
In one story, yeah.
So I'm just saying, like, how is the plant surviving in salt water? Because they're just going to decompose, aren't they?
Right. Yeah. Sunlight or no sunlight. Yeah.
I mean, I guess we're trying to make something illogical logical, right? So, are we getting flooded here, right? Are we flooding our brains with rubbish? Because isn't this really?
Of course it's rubbish. Like the amount of objections to it is incredible. Like you've still got geology to go, and how we don't see evidence of a flood, and we see, we're aware of places that have had rapid flooding before. It can toss boulders around. It leaves very, very specific marks, and we don't see that worldwide. It's just
Fabio asked a question too. Fabio, the verses say that everything that wasn't on the ark, life-wise, that had the breath of life, was wiped out. So all of them would have died. But
why isn't Fabio in here now?
I don't know how they would have been on the ark.
Oh, I've heard there was a strata that the fresh water was at the top, and then like the salt water was somehow beneath that, and that somehow there's a way to keep them from mixing.
Well, I guess you could. There is a place on Earth that does have two separate layers of water like that, but it has to, I think, do with temperature, not saltwater and freshwater.
No,
yeah.
it is. I mean,
Is it saltwater and freshwater?
well, freshwater is going to be heavier than saline or
Yeah,
saltwater, and I think that's the case in the or that's one of the mechanisms that drives the North Atlantic, Mid Atlantic stream, or whatever it's called.
Oh yeah, yeah. But
So,
there is a kind of like the Dead Sea. There's a sea somewhere that you can
oh yeah,
scuba
the Dead
dive
Sea.
in,
Yeah,
and there's two
Yeah,
different
yeah.
layers of water. And I don't think it's saltwater and freshwater. I think it has to do with temperature of something. There's a difference in the two separate layers of water. Like it is strata. Like it's odd. I'll have to
Okay.
Google what it is, but
Well,
it does
there's
give
even
different strata.
there's even worse things. Like if you talk to geologists, they sort of tell you about tuff, right? And what tuff is it's volcanic ash that's been compressed down into a sort of rock layer. The problem with tuff is that if it gets sort of exposed to any water whatsoever, it becomes clay, not tuff, right? So this layer that's apparently laid down by the flood somehow has to remain perfectly dry in order to be laid down, which makes no sense whatsoever. Like the hydrological sort of geology that they've got going on, what's it called? The catastrophism, I think, is their model. It doesn't work because you cannot have tuff and water existing side by side. It doesn't work.
Yep, another point here by Andrew. As Scott Duke pointed out earlier, we have evidence of giant glacial lake floods on the North Pacific, or in the Pacific Northwest.
I'm struggling to remember the name.
Signs of that elsewhere?
It was the Missoula flood, where a great ice dam broke, and sort of so we have rapid deposition. We have an extreme amount of water pouring into the Missoula plains.
I just want to point out it's already been highlighted, but Calamity Jones here.
Oh dear.
Calamity Jones.
Yeah. So. And the Missoula floods they're fascinating. We have evidence that boulders were tossed by this flood water. It is exactly as you would expect in a global flood, like rapid water, vastly changing the landscape. So there's these signs of hydrological erosion done very rapidly as the glacier melted. There was an ice dam, and the ice dam all broke at once. So we do have evidence of these rapid hydrological movements, but what we don't find is them worldwide. We find them in specific places at specific times, or specific layers in the geological record. Yeah. Is that the real Jill? Is that a fake Jill?
Yeah, no, that's
I
the
could
real
never
Jill.
tell. Look,
That's
it's
the real
hard to
Jill.
tell the difference between a Jill that's being serious and someone that's being, funny because, the
Jill does
arguments
have
are
a sense of
essentially
humor.
same.
Jill does have a sense of humor. Okay, that is the real Jill. As far as
Well,
I
when you find it, bring it to me. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure he does have a link. I'm almost certain I would have sent him a link. I can't see why I wouldn't send Fabio a link.
Yeah, that's what I meant.
You know, there's a good point to be made too of if you've got two of every kind in one story, or 2 and 7 of every kind, is the breeding that
inbreeding
could occur with some of these animals is going to be at a different rate than other animals. And
well, it's the same inbreeding that God used when Adam and Eve were around.
But to me, that's always been
something.
Or
the 8 people after the flood.
Yeah, exactly. That too.
That's always been something
just
like
is a little.
That's always been something which is a little curious to me, because, like, 2 of all the wild animals and 7 of the domesticated animals, right, and presumably not pigs. Okay,
Yeah,
so
no, unclean.
Moving cloaked animals.
Okay, so I'm just saying, like, what is the narrative or the bent that they have for saving 7 of the domesticated ones, which, let's face it, have a very narrow genetic pool, right? Versus the 2 of the, right? I mean, is that some kind of understanding of how
I think it's
delicate
just
the
a magic
balance is
number.
of domesticated?
No, I think
No,
it's
I think
magic number 7.
Well, I think probably in the original, whatever event that it's based upon, he probably saved more of the animals that he could eat, right? That's basically it. So he saved, maybe a couple of horses or a few horses, but he really said, okay, well, I'm going to prioritize things that I can eat because I need to live through the rest of the year. There's no emergency services back in ancient Mesopotamia, so his priority may have been on, well, the waters are rising, I've got to save food. So, getting the clean animals. And then that became a magic number 7, sure.
Well, Jay brings up a really good point there, actually, I feel, which is to say, when was it prescribed that certain animals were unclean? Was it before the flood or after the flood?
Well, that's actually kind of a weird thing, because like I've read about that with ancient Near Eastern scholars when they talk about like the cleanliness codes. That's usually borrowed from other cultures. So depending on the sources that they're talking about, it could be, from different, different influences. So I always thought that was kind of interesting too. That they would have been like, well, there's clean and unclean animals. We're going to have 7 pairs in the one narrative, 7 pairs of the clean ones, and then 2 by 2 of the unclean animals. Like, okay,
What's the difference between like a clean and unclean animal? Like they didn't take a bath, or just something else in there?
No, it's whether their hooves are cloven and whether or not they chew cud.
right. And so one
Right.
of the things that usually comes up is whether or not they're halal or haram.
It's like, because that's something a dating gives a shit about, right?
Well, but
Yeah,
that's the trick. So the idea, like, that actually lends credence to the idea that's coming from 2 separate sources, because in one source it's just like, oh, it's just animals 2 by 2, and there's no distinction given. And then the other one, it's like, now we want 7 pairs of the clean animals, and then 2
Why
by
is
2
God?
of
Why is
unclean.
God? I'm sorry to interrupt, but why is God making unclean animals?
Well, it has
Great
nothing
question.
to do. It's not about that, right? It's about covenant stuff. So for them, like in terms of the way that they're writing this kind of stuff, they're just thinking in terms of like, oh, this is what the God wants us to do in order to preserve like an extra amount of animals he wants us to barbecue to him in order to glorify him after we survive the disaster.
Well, this is really gonna burst your bubble, Jeff. But when God was trying to find a suitable mate for Adam, were the unclean animals excluded from that lineup?
No.
Okay.
That's the trick. That's because in one narrative, no, and the other narrative, like, oh, he needs a helpmate. They weren't fit. He didn't find anybody that was fit, so God had to create him a female.
I think reading the Bible, it kind of like I don't know. I get the feeling, and maybe that this is just sort of presentism that I'm sort of, but I get the feeling that the people who are reading it should know what clean and unclean means. That it is a cultural sort of it's appeal to their culture kind of thing. That you get the feeling that they know exactly what clean and unclean does mean. It doesn't need to point this out. It
means sacred and unsacred. Yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, Mark. It seems to me that unclean, like somebody explained it this way to me, that it's more about the habits of the animal themselves. So one of the reasons they don't like pigs is because pigs eat feces. Right, so pigs will eat absolutely anything, including their own feces.
Got people teeth.
Yeah.
I think that's actually specific to pigs in captivity. I don't think they act that way in the wild.
Yeah, but they would have been, I mean, presumably they were keeping, I don't know, actually. I don't know exactly what animals they had. I do remember seeing something about early
did not have pigs.
Well, just
In
early
fact,
civilization.
Actually,
go ahead.
Well, sorry, yeah, but that's actually in God is Not Great, in Hitchens's book. He mentions that archaeologists, I'm getting this from Hitchens, but it's from archaeology originally, that they actually could identify whether a particular area, like historic area that they've dug up, was Hebrew or not by the absence of pig bones. So like they made a point they did not eat pigs.
Yeah.
So like if you found there was no pig bones in their rubbish tips, then you knew you were likely at a Hebrew site.
Okay.
Hey, I just want to let you guys know I need to get going. Things are going to die on this side of things, but thank you for letting me on here. I had fun.
No, glad
Thank
you
Simon,
came.
for the invitation. Also, by the way, a special shout out Floyd FP. Great to see you again. And JD Kane. I have not seen you in like years, my man. Good to see you.
Hey, quickly before you leave, Jeff.
Yep. Sorry.
What I messaged your
Jefferson's jugs that bring all the boys to the yard. So.
Okay. I don't think that's true, but go ahead.
What I messaged you in that video the other day. He's going to be here next weekend.
Who's that?
Randolph.
Oh, Randolph.
Yep.
Oh, for this showing next Saturday.
Yeah.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, I'll be here. Yeah, I'll do what I can to be here.
Yep.
Lovely.
Great.
Lovely. Lovely.
All right. Thank you, guys. I'll
Yep.
catch
Have
you
a
later.
good weekend.
Yep. Bye.
Welcome, Pseudo. And also, So I had a point I was making, but it's now gone. Sorry about that. Yeah, because I was looking at you, Christopher.
Great spiel, isn't it? We just lose.
Disapproving look at my jug joke.
Oh, every time you tell a joke, you have the best lead ups to jokes. My favorite is knowing that I hate lemon bars. One time you asked me if I was just cooking. Oh, you grilling today, Chris? And you just let me go and go. Yeah, I made ribs and I made burgers and I made dogs and you just let me go. And then at the end, be like,
dogs. How dare you?
Well, I mean, they're delicious. Woof woof. You're like, oh, did you have any dessert? And I was like, well, yeah, we had some ice cream and stuff. And you're like, no lemon bars. So me shaking my head disapprovingly at your jokes, I should hope that that's baked into the Mowdy experience.
It is,
not
and
a
I love it. So,
it's
speaking of which, did you see the video that I posted? I mean, this is a separate thing. The video I posted by Missing Persons.
No.
Okay.
Band?
Yeah. Oh my God, you know it already. Okay, right. Never mind.
I'm
Joke's
completely.
done.
I have no idea what you're even referring to.
Yeah. Okay. Never mind. I'll include you, Jay. So.
If it's a cult of Mowdy thing, I want nothing to do with it.
I don't even know where I posted it, but I do remember. Anyway,
I got it right here. Missing person words. Yeah, and that was his wife, Terry Bozio's wife. Well, what was her name?
Dale
Bozio. Yes.
And
didn't Juan Cucarulo play guitar?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, it was a star-studded band, and well, there you go.
All
okay.
Zappa guys, and back to the.
Yeah. Nice drums is what I put on it. Okay.
Yeah, if only she were playing drums.
Yeah. Okay. Back to where we were. Other flood myths. I guess we should be opening this out now, or other gods. I mean, like, do we think?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I actually, on other gods, learned something I didn't know. I can't tell you the verse, but I can tell you it was what's his name? If I remember his name in a minute, I'll tell you. It's the book of so and so. But the Hebrews were going to war against the Edomites, a people, and God told them, Yahweh told them that they were blessed and they would win. They had been on a campaign of wars, and when they went to the Edomites, the king there sacrifices his son to the god of the Edomites so that they would not die. And
God drove the Israelites back.
Right. The god of the Edomites fights and pretty much destroys Yahweh's army.
Yeah, it contradicts the narrative that God would always deliver Israelites' enemies unto them, as long as they were fighting for God. Yeah,
either they've done something wrong or God's not all powerful. But either way, and the story ends right there at the end of that chapter, and then it moves on to talk about other things. It doesn't go into any detail on it.
Yeah, that and the Iron Chariots have been widely debated.
Yeah, because that's actually that's the oldest piece of evidence archaeologically we found is from the king there that sacrificed his son in that story. Had some kind of plaque or memorabilia or something, and that's the earliest piece of evidence we have. But it goes to show the whole point is to go to show that there, at least at that time, there was another god.
Yeah, I mean, God with a small g. And is that going to be the excuse back? Right.
No, he would have been equal to Yahweh. He just because he actually beat Yahweh back.
Right? Is there not
in this instance?
Okay. Could I just
So
say
it was like a fight amongst these big G gods.
Did you say Edomites or Elamites? I'm not familiar with this story. Edomites. Okay. Do we know where this is in the Bible so I can look it up?
I said Edomites, but I might be mispronouncing it. I'm trying to find the chapter.
Okay.
It's 2 Kings, Simos. 2 Kings chapter 3. Chapter 3. It's the narrative is it's Moab revolts. Joram, son of Ahab, became king of Israel and Samaria in the 18th year of Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, and he reigned 12 years. He did evil in the eyes of the Lord, but not as his father and mother had done. He got rid of the sacred stone, blah, blah, blah. Then it says, now Mesha, king of Moab, raised sheep, and he had to pay the king of Israel a tribute. And then it goes into basically disagreement, and then there's an attack, and then all that other crap. But yeah, it's chapter 3 of 2 Kings.
Like, for some reason, Ishmael keeps coming in my head, but I know that's not the guy's name. It's just a similar name.
The son of the king, I think, is.
Oh no, you've got the same thing. It's just written somewhere else in the Bible as well. It's in 2 Kings. What you're talking about, same story. But the whole point was to show that like there are other gods, like I said, at least at that time, that were warring.
Yeah, but when the Moabites came to the camp of Israel, the Israelites rose up and fought them until they fled. And the Israelites invaded the land and slaughtered the Moabites. They destroyed the towns, and each man threw a stone on every good field until it was covered. They stopped up all the springs and cut down every good tree. Only Ker Hareseth was left with its stones in place, but men armed with slings surrounded it and attacked it. When the king of Moab saw that the battle had gone against him, he took with him 700 swordsmen to break through the king of Edom, but they failed. Then he took his firstborn son, who was to succeed him as king, offered him as a sacrifice on the city wall. The fury against Israel was great. They withdrew and returned to their own land.
Now, I don't know of any other stories of these like gods attacking people or any other books that are recognized as like the Bible with Yahweh kind of thing. I don't know of many other religions that survived, at least. that
Sorry,
go after these gods. But
I just need to ask Floyd a question here. So, who is the son that was being referred to? Then he took his eldest son, who was to reign in his stead.
Yeah, that's what I guess it was Jay just read. It's the son of the king of the Moabites.
Ah, okay. So blood magic, in other words. Yeah.
Mesha, the king of Moab.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah, so child sacrifice actually works.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And it was. We've actually been talking about it being a thing, and it's in the earlier of the Old Testament speaks about it. Speaks about child sacrifice. Speaks about sacrifice in general, which would include children. and then it talks of, it obviously talks about not to continue it later on, but it
Yeah,
actually does talk about that it was going on and was happening.
Yeah,
at
no,
some point.
it's interesting that child sacrifice works against Yahweh, more importantly. Right? That's just like, that's the one thing he wiped out Sodom and Gomorrah for, right? And yet,
Well, the other interesting thing I would point out was maybe Floyd's more familiar with this, if I remember correctly, but weren't the Israelites specifically instructed during times of war to not cut down all the trees, to not ruin the land?
It depends what mood Yahweh's in. I mean,
Oh, okay.
sometimes they say wipe out everything, wipe out the cattle, everything, and other times they say, oh well, just kill the men and take the women, kill all the males, but you could take the women and the cattle and things like that. So
but yeah, I
depends
just
what
remember.
mood he's in.
Yeah, I think it was in Deuteronomy or something I can't remember if it was in Deuteronomy. I think it was in Deuteronomy somewhere. But yeah, there was like this layout of basically, don't cut down all the trees, only use what you need, don't ruin the land, don't spoil it. Yet you see here in Second Kings, they're basically, it says they cut down all the trees, they put rocks over all the fields, they basically ruin the streams and all that crap. So basically, they defile the land in the process of going against the Moabites.
Yeah, actually,
I think sort of God overrides that commandment at certain points. It's sort of, if God commands it, then it's a free pass to do
It's a subjective.
whatever.
Yeah. Well,
it's
actually,
a highly subjective normative. Yeah.
I remember Dr. Josh Bowen writing about this in one of his books, and I think I recall if the people they're attacking is a neighbor of theirs, is an adjacent neighbor, that was part of the ban, and they wiped out everything. Everything had to be. But if it was like a far away country, they're allowed to take the spoils of war. Take their women and cattle and any riches or anything like that. But if it was their local neighbor, they were considered under the ban. I forget what the Hebrew word was, and they had to wipe out everything.
Well, and what you just said, and I've been talking with Dr. Josh over on Clubhouse. Just to tangent, whenever it does say take the women and all that, but kill everything else, take the virgin for yourself. I had never realized that either. It says and refer to them as plunder. So they're considered not women at that point. Like they're considered plunder.
Yes.
To do what you will with. That was
and it even lists the people among the plunder. It sort of says, when it sort of documents what they took, it lists the loot, and part of the loot is people. Really.
Yeah, that's that's after Israel goes back and attacks Midian after their plague.
Yeah, the Midianites. Yeah.
Yep.
Thanks, Matty.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Okay, so is there any general things that, what I'd like to kind of talk about now is the generality of biblical literature, right? I hear this argument quite a lot. Yeah, but this Bible thing, this is excellent ancient literature. These are great stories. I'm not saying I believe this, right? But because I've read the Odyssey. But I'm just saying, how many people have heard that argument from atheists, and B, those that have read it? I haven't personally. But do you think that has any weight? Do you think these are remarkable stories? I've heard biblical scholars say it, not just atheists, not theists, but atheists as well.
Well, I mean, some of the stories, are great. They're part of antiquity, legendary stories and so forth. But like you said, we have the Iliad and Odyssey and other mythical stories as well. But yeah, it's fine saying, yeah, these are great stories. You think, but so what? Great. You know, uh, are we going to lose our lives by them? Are we going to think they're real?
Except for Joan.
How are they really going to, do they really influence my worldview at all? No, not at all. Well, I should say
You're
not at
probably
all.
going to have to
But
clarify what you mean by great there. So
Well,
what do you
yeah.
mean by great?
Okay, let me do that then.
Like, are they well written? No. Like what?
Okay, let me do that then. So by great, I assume when people tell me this, that they have such moral import or such transcendent import, like the Jordan Peterson type argument, that they describe archetypal beings or ways that humankind's align to in order to generate a secure society.
Oh, hell no. There's no moral. I don't know what moral implication that you would get from that, apart from obey this, sort of idea of a deity. I'm not even sure that that's moral in itself. I don't know. Is there a theme here, like sort of prepare for the worst kind of thing? Is that possibly the moral or the sort of, what you're going to get from it? I don't know. What a modern person would get.
Yeah, do you mean moral of the story, or do you mean like human morality?
Well, no, just really means ethics, not morality. Just the only moral is you need to have the piss scared out of you, and if you don't do what the priests and the elders tell you, horrible things are going to happen.
Right.
Yeah, that's the only thing I can get out of it. Obey God, or else, and obey the authorities who represent God, or else.
Yeah. Like if an old dude's building a boat, listen to him. Apparently, that's what you're supposed to do. I don't.
Or don't listen to him.
Or laying up 7 years worth of grain to, be able to withstand the 7 years.
If you don't listen to the old guy building the big boat, get your arm floaties out. It's gonna be a hell of a ride.
That's right.
It does occur to me. It does occur to me that there are much better stories to convey that kind of sense, like the grasshopper and the ant kind of thing, right? So save up and prepare because there might be a sort of hunger or whatever. Prepare for the winter. It is that's much better story than hey, build a boat. I don't. I think a great story.
That you're definitely, and certainly that applies to the Old Testament. I think especially that they're just some myths in order to try and keep a tribe together, right? That is somewhat disparate and made up from different groups, i.e., these two groups that Floyd was talking about earlier, the Israelites and the Judeans. Judeans, thank you. So I think there is that to the Old Testament. But the other thing I wanted to bring up was about the New Testament scholarship that I've heard recently, which is about how the themes of the Greek myths are reflected in the New Testament. So has anybody come across that and have an opinion on that?
Themes of the Greek myths.
Yeah, because the New Testament is written in Greek. And obviously, therefore, everybody who wrote the New Testament would have been immersed in Greek literature in order to learn the language. And therefore, they probably extrapolated themes from Greek literature when devising the New Testament. I think that's roughly how it goes.
Do you think that would have...
Yeah, Dennis MacDonald has a book where he shows, themes from Greek literature, and Iliad and Odyssey appear in the New Testament. One example is James and John, the sons of Zebedee. They're called the sons of thunder, and that's almost a duplicate of Castor and Pollux in the Homeric epics. Yeah, so it's very similar. So I think it's just a coincidence that you have both sons of thunder, in Homer, and in the New Testament. So that's just
My understanding is basically Paul is bringing Middle Platonism to the Levant.
Yeah, I mean, there are other themes too. Philo brought in Hellenistic concepts into Judaism. We see that in the divine logos that appears in the Gospel of John.
Mm-hmm.
So there are themes floating around at the time that made its way into the New Testament.
Jesus was unrecognized at some point, wasn't he, as well? Similar to the way Ithaca, who's on Odysseus was unrecognized when he first got back to Ithaca after his trials and tribulations. Same way Jesus went to hell for several days and was unrecognized when he came back. Just to name another one, which I heard, which I thought was quite intriguing.
Yeah, but later on, Jesus killed a fig tree with his mind for not having fruit, and then oh, that's that. Now I remember that.
JD.
I mean, it's God.
There's
He's
my
killing
boy.
fig trees with his mind because they dare to not have fruit out of season. That's when you know you're talking to a deity.
That's when you know your boy's back in town.
Why?
That
What happened?
does
He killed a
actually
tree.
make me
What did he
think-
kill a tree for? It didn't have fruit. What was it supposed to have fruit? Well, no, it's fucking winter. Must be Jesus.
That's pretty. No, that does make me think, Simon, though, that if you're taking these stories thousands of years ago, maybe if you're looking through that lens in that culture and that time, the morality or the moral of the stories that you get from these being archetypal structures might have been helpful at creating like a proto society that then gets better and better and leads up to kind of today's societies. Maybe.
Yeah, I think that's roughly what they're kind of getting at, although not so with the New Testament, I believe. But I mean, that could have been the same for any number of civilizations. In fact, one of the issues I've got is that it seems that the myths are carried over from previous civilizations, which did have the semblance of the first civilizations, right? The Sumerian civilization. And that, it seems, was passed right the way through, not just to the Israelites through captivity, etc., and then Judeans through the Israelites, but also to both the Egyptians and the Greeks, who seem to have some semblance of worship of these gods, which, or at least replicating the gods, right, of the ancients, in their case, Babylonians, and then obviously the Babylonians through the Sumerians. So it seems to me that there is a constant theme through the whole of ancient history into the modern world, into at least up until the Romans. And obviously in the West, we then combine that with the paganism, right? So the practicalities of paganism combined with this Greek influence of what's the word I'm looking for? Heroism or drama, I guess. That would be my take on it anyway. Sorry to.
So don't let me forget the funniest thing I've heard about Noah's flood is, are you aware that Jesus is in Noah's flood? The flood story. Have anyone heard this before from an apologist?
I've never heard that before.
Yeah.
So
sorry, I'm just trying to catch up with Jill's stuff here.
Why would you do that?
Well, because it's a Christian viewpoint.
Oh, that's true. It is a Christian viewpoint.
I don't know.
Harsh, Mark. Harsh.
Well, he deserves it.
I know. He does. I'm not gonna sit there and go, now, Mark.
There is a link, Jill, if you want to come in.
So how is Jesus represented in the flood?
The ark had a door.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I
It's
got you.
hilarious. It's absolutely hilarious because Jesus is a door, and the ark had a door. It clearly states it had a door. Ergo, and follow me on this one. The door of the ark is Jesus.
Okay.
I have heard somebody apparently in
why not?
absolute seriousness make this argument.
Right.
Wait a minute.
I'm
I'm
using the same book.
Do you want to explain?
okay.
Do you want to explain this, Floyd?
Yeah, because I have not heard this one. I don't think.
Yes, this is First Peter 3 in the New Testament. So it's the ark is a type of Christ in the church, where just like everyone gets flooded out. Oh, that symbolizes baptism. But it's kind of strange though, because everyone who's baptized with water dies, right? Noah and his family, they all get wet. But this is the view in First Peter 3, and there was allegorical views within the early church of the flood.
Yeah, but every man is appointed to die at least once. But the Christians, having been baptized, get a second life.
Yeah. But as Noah and his family got saved by water, so will Christians, get saved through baptism. That's
sorry, Simos, I couldn't help it.
And if you want to ever see something hilarious, look up Baptism and Big Lebowski. It's hilarious.
I just couldn't help myself. It's an inside joke.
But Simos,
Dead air.
Yeah,
I was muted. I was talking to cover it.
You were
As
muted.
usual.
You're really having mute problems today, Simos.
I am. I could be one.
Usually are really good.
I've never known you to have them like that. Yeah.
Okay, so I guess this was Jordan Peterson's point anyway, which is that these myths are central to Western civilization. Again, another thing I've heard. Christianity is important for the West because without it, we wouldn't have science.
Oh, come on.
Well, I'm saying, what do you guys think?
I think the Greeks did really well with science before Christianity came along.
Yep.
Well, we're talking about
I'd say we need to not listen to what Jordan Peterson has to say on most subjects. Occasionally he says some nice truisms, but a lot of stuff is complete garbage.
I eat beef.
Okay,
salt,
sorry.
and water. Nothing else.
Sorry to interrupt, Floyd. You put up another one. I want you to just go through this one for me.
Yeah.
Origin.
So again, they're trying to find allegorical meaning in the flood. So origin, view the ark as a pyramid form.
Yay!
And St. Augustine viewed the dimensions of the ark corresponding to the dimensions of the human body of Christ in the church. And the dimensions of the ark were viewed as allegorical by Hippocrates, who understood them as signs of for the timing of Christ's coming. So, basically, Christians just read Christ into everything in the Old Testament. Everything in the Old Testament represents Jesus somehow. Hey, it's not Nadia.
Okay. So.
Yeah, Des McDonald has been on Myth Vision a lot, and they cover the Homeric epics influencing the New Testament. Check out it's the Myth Vision podcast. Dennis McDonald's on that a lot, or has been.
All right, he's very good, Myth Vision, isn't he? He has a lot of good, great people on.
Top scholars he has. Yeah.
And always an interesting take as well. He's a very good interviewer as well. So I think this is so. What do we think about science, Western civilization, Christianity? Could we have Western civilization without Christianity?
Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of other myths that that bring order out chaos. They have their own creation stories where they take the chaotic orders and mortars and form form order with it, and that's where the Bible gets its creation stories from. So it's nothing unique. The Bible's so unique. These stories are so different than the other cultures. No, they're not.
Not really, no. But it depends what you mean by Western. Like, would we have Western civilization as we know it? No, but maybe that's not a bad thing. Maybe it would have been better without. Like, we've got no counterfactuals to say whether it would have been better or worse, and obviously the civilization as we know it wouldn't have existed, but Western civilization in general is more based upon sort of the Greek ideas and classical Greek and Roman ideas than it is upon. But that's debatable. Absolutely, that's debatable. But I think there's a lot that goes into Western society. Would it be the same? No. Would it be a Western society? Sure.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard the argument made that we would have actually, it would have been better without it because of the detriment to science that the early Christians especially, but the middle-aged Christians most especially, gave to things. So Archimedes, for instance, inventing quite a lot of modern ideas, which took another 2,000 or 1,500 years to come about. Steam, for instance, and Hypatia, for instance, investigating infinite sums, which would have led to calculus maybe 1,000 years earlier.
Well, but I think that without Christianity, Western society kind of would have been taken over by Islamic influence. So, would there have been something else that would have sort of united all of what was Christendom and the Holy Roman Empire? Yeah, maybe. It's impossible to say.
Yeah, maybe the the Holy Roman Empire was a bulwark against the Muslims, I guess. You would be right.
But the thing is, the Islamic Empire was heavily influenced by the Holy Roman Empire through
that's true. Yeah,
their trade routes and things like that. To where they've got a lot of their. They won't admit it, but that's where they've got a lot of their influence from.
Well, and vice versa, of course. So
right,
it the whole question becomes like we just how can we tell, because we've got no counterfactuals to say what would have happened if Christian didn't exist or religions didn't exist. I think it's an impossible question.
Well, you're almost sort of saying that it's definitely true, because if the Muslims had taken over Europe, for instance, presumably we would have had Aristotle's writings and the Greek writings earlier in Europe than we did consequently have, because it was only through Arab translations that we actually managed to get the majority of Aristotle's work, or at least the ones that the Holy Roman Empire had decided not to destroy.
Yeah, what if McDonald's would have been Burger King? Like,
yeah, no, that's interesting as well.
I'm just messing.
Yeah. No, you're right. It reminds me of the Ali G joke. How come all the best chefs are men? McDonald's, KFC. The only thing the women have got are Wendy's. That's rubbish.
Don't be knocking Wendy's now.
Oh, schisms in the fast food industry. Oh no.
Everybody knows In-N-Out is the best.
Since when has anybody been united?
Right.
Yeah, good point. Okay. Okay.
But
I mean,
like,
I think.
you were asking about gods to begin with, right? Like other gods
Yeah.
and things like that. Is there any other text or anything like that that is taken seriously that you know of besides the major religions that are mainstream?
Well,
Well, I mean, let's
obviously,
not
in other
forget
parts,
that.
in other parts of the world, then yeah.
Let's not forget that Judaism started as a the Mesopotamian religions were polytheistic. I mean, you had Baal, which was the Yahweh's brother under their father El, who was the chief of the gods. Like Yahweh wasn't even the chief of the pantheon. That's the thing. He's just the one that sort of everything got amalgamated into. And this isn't sort of contentious at all among scholars. We know that there was a pantheon, and Ahira was the consort of El, and Yahweh kind of incorporated El and became El Yahweh El or El Yahweh. I can't remember which one it was, but none of that's even debated among scholars. It's pretty well known.
Yeah, actually, Nadia, I wish she would jump in. She knows a ton about that. But that's why all the angels are named, Mikael, Samael, Azrael. Like they've all got El as part of their name because they come from descendants of El.
Yeah, again, copied from those original gods, which seem to go all the way through, right through to the Roman, right through Greek and Roman as well, and there's no difference in the Middle East. And I wonder if that's some kind of semblance of trying to hang on to the original stories, right? And the reason that all the division happens is because they've misunderstood or misremembered the stories, and they've gone down this political path, right? One of the things that I recognize in Islam is that it's a very political religion because of the way the book's written, and as a result they seem to have these feuds between sects which are much more intense than the Christian world, even though they were quite intense in the Christian world. The Baptists and the Congregationalists, say, for instance.
Yeah. Well, even if you go further back, I think the Cathars would definitely disagree that it wasn't intense.
Yeah, okay, fair point. I think
which are sort of, don't exist anymore because they were all killed off en masse, like the entire lot of them.
Fair point.
And that sort of, it always makes me sort of question, like when they say, but Christianity wasn't spread by the sword, and it's like, well, hang on a second. There was quite a bit of killing to establish what we now know as Christianity. You could even make the argument that the Americas were sort of converted by the sword, if you will, more by the gun, but you know what I mean.
What would you mean, the Native Americans?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, that's always been the way, isn't it?
Kind of established their religion.
Oh, even getting up to the Constitution point. Like, I mean, people were being, harassed and murdered by the gun or the sword, things like that. Then Civil War, you got to
the Puritarians versus the Quakers kind of thing. Yeah.
You have to get past the Puritans. Like, you still go up to, like, modern day, we don't fight that way, but the politicians of yore in our past definitely we're fighting like by the gun, and plenty of them had duels all the time, and then some of it led up to a couple wars or revolutions. And
to get back on Simos, I think you had asked about if there were any other like major myths about the flood. And
Yeah.
I'm surprised that we
Oh.
didn't go there earlier. Actually, hat tip to Jill. Him and I were having a discussion yesterday, and in the Epic of Gilgamesh and what that was, the something Genesis, they talk about it, and they said that,
Atrahasis.
yes, they said that in that the gods didn't create the flood, but they knew it was coming and chose not to save man. So it's also possible that the flood was not even caused by God. It was just a natural occurrence, and that the god or gods chose not to save them. And then at the end, finally relented and saved a few.
Just Nadia, the pinned comment is the one up the top. It's sort of the chat will scroll, but the pinned comment in blue up the top, or whatever color you've got to highlight in the top, is the pinned one that
Yeah, they
Simos
post.
has pinned.
Yeah.
Yeah,
both,
they shared it again.
Xbox and I also shared, put it down below.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
We rushed to do it.
Everyone wants Nadia.
Yeah, we
Well,
do.
I mean, I just wanted to explain what the pinned comment was.
No, that's cool. That's cool.
because
That's cool.
well, it's you can give a person a fish and feed them for an afternoon.
Yeah.
Actually, the better one is like you can give a person a fire and warm them for an afternoon. If you set someone on fire, they're warm for the rest of their life.
It's true.
Thanks
But
to our Terry Pratchett for that one.
Maybe the flood is just a very localized
That doesn't make
phenomenon.
sense.
That makes perfect sense.
But maybe the flood was
50% of
just
it's
a very localized phenomena, and it was naturally occurring. So what do people think about that?
Yeah, I mean, almost certainly. And like I was saying, there's archaeological evidence that the people in Sumeria and the lower Mesopotamia area were building their buildings with bitumen on the bottom layers, like 6 feet up.
Mm-hmm.
Right, so clearly they understood that these places were going to be flooded. And also, I think there is a seasonal rain in the Anatolian hills as well, which causes these rivers to flood. So I think they were well aware of their own, what's the word, insecurities, I don't know. They were well aware of their own dependency upon the vagaries of nature and the whatever. So yeah, there we go. Oh, fantastic. Okay, here we go. Yay! Welcome, Nadia.
Nadia.
So nice to see
Hi,
you.
Nadia. Good to
It's
meet
great
you.
to see you.
Talk about another OG. Holy shit.
There we go.
I have only ever heard stories of Nadia.
Well, here we
Yeah,
go.
me too. The great Nadia.
Okay, so Nadia, did you have anything to comment on A, the flood, or B, what Christianity means to Europe?
Well, I think the idea was that there was supposed to be, some sort of class rebellion or whatever that got basically derailed and defused by corralling it with the religion. I mean, I guess it started with the religion, and then getting the control of the religion defused a sort of class rebellion.
Right, you mean the Reformation type idea?
No, the unrest during the crisis of the 3rd century.
Okay. Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah. Okay. So the Christianity was for, shall we say, the workers? I guess. I mean, they wouldn't have been called the workers, obviously, but the common people, I suppose, the non. I don't know what the word I'm looking for. The non-citizens of Rome, I guess, maybe.
Plebeians.
Plebeians.
Yeah,
Thank
plebeians,
you so much
yeah.
for the right word. Yeah, is that what you mean? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so this is to do with the ease with which you're able to convert to Christianity, or when I say ease, I mean the lack of cost, I suppose, as opposed to other available religions, for which you had to have sacrifices.
Well, it started off like any other mystery cult, and then I guess somehow, and maybe Floyd knows more about this, it ended up getting opened up somehow. Maybe, I guess maybe speculation, but I guess maybe it got so moribund that the sort of very last holdouts just opened it up wide to try and get new recruits.
Yeah, because it's often been
that could make sense.
Yeah, no, it's often been said that there's some kind of mystery, or at least again another Christian theme that they like to portray, as far as, or theist theme they like to portray, is that it's a kind of amazement how this tiny little sect of Christianity spread into like prominence, right, through this period, and into Rome being accepted as the religion of Rome. And so when you say how do you think it suffused through the upper ranks, and why would they accept it like that?
It didn't. Basically, a lot of it just centers around Constantine. It's kind of a coincidence that Constantine became Christian or rose to the emperorship or whatever.
Well, I don't think it's a coincidence that Constantine decided to adopt it. It was probably more very advantageous for Constantine himself to sort of adopt Christianity. I've heard it argued. I'm not sure how well this can be argued, but I have heard it argued that it provides a lot of control over people and unites people rather than the disparate sort of different gods of Rome that sort of divided people.
Well, given the person that Constantine was, it was not really surprising that he did what he did. On the other hand, it did take a big bunch of coincidences for someone with Constantine's background who was kind of poised to do that. To end up as emperor.
I kind of put this down to you'll get a kick out of this one, the Pine Creek theorem. So Constantine's mother was a Christian. So maybe Constantine was just a
mama's boy.
Yeah, basically. And it's a woman, right? So that's the Pine Creek theorem, moreover.
Your mother's
I thought the Pine
Christian.
Creek theorem was about wanting a girl, basically. So that's a bit weird.
That's a corollary. Sure. It's just his theorem is that more women have brought men to the gospel or more men to Christianity than the gospel has. Something like that.
Oh.
Yeah, I think that's it. Which I think is probably, fairly true if you listen to a lot of the apologists at the time and what they were saying. I certainly remember going to church because I was invited there by someone of the fairer sex, and I never had any interest in Jesus. I can tell you that right now. But there you go. Hey, even at 11, I knew which way the rocks were pointing.
I'm not sure how the culture was then of a child being raised or reared by their mother, while their father was doing the work or doing the being a politician or whatever off. If they would have been more influenced by their mother and her religion kind of thing. I know that's more of how that probably would have happened 20 years ago, but I don't know. hundreds of years ago.
Yeah, no, I agree.
I'm so sorry bringing that shit in here.
No, you leave it in the side chat. I'm perfectly happy. I'll keep putting it on screen just so we got a record of it, Jay. Don't you worry.
He was here, and I think he's still here. So I just have
the other side. I just want to point out here as well is that once it was established as a unifying theme across Western Europe, I guess by the Franks maybe or Charlemagne, someone like that. That there was a strong tradition then of improving science and agriculture and animal husbandry in this country as well. I mean, bacon, for instance, I'm thinking of. That then the splits, the schism. Well, the schism encouraged, right? So Northern Europe versus Southern Europe. There's a strong tradition in Northern Europe of like practicality or pragmatism and the work ethic, as opposed to the Catholics in Southern Europe. It's almost like a brain drain. Right?
Are you just trying to say that Southern Europeans are lazy? Is that?
I'm just thinking if Fabio's watching, I've got to get the
ticket. Yeah, no, that's what I was thinking of. Yeah.
But there is something to that, right? I mean, there is something to that. There was a lot of people moved north from Southern Europe to Northern Europe because of the freedom of expression which they found within Protestantism. So yeah, there is that. Anyway, there we go. I just want to go around and say, is there anybody just finish up if everybody's just got something to say on the topic, and then we will call it a night there, I guess.
I have some off topic. It's kind of out of nowhere.
Yeah.
Nadia, hi.
Hi.
We've talked for like 4 or 5 years. You look like way better than last time I saw you. Like, look like
amazing,
you got things
right?
in order. So yeah.
And you sound amazing.
Well, thanks. I'm working on it. It's not all the way there yet. But anyway.
You got far enough that I wouldn't be able to tell if I just met you. So yay, that's you.
Absolutely.
You're welcome. This is my first time seeing her. I've never.
You're welcome here every week.
I've never met Nadia as well, but
we do this once a week. So please come on and join us and give your input to the topics that we have. They're generally on the same sort of topics that we all used to talk about.
Although drink something different, because whatever you drink, that looked horrifying, whatever that was.
Yeah, Metamucil.
It's what? Sorry,
Metamucil.
Oh, I don't know that.
It's for stomach issues.
Right? Oh, is it? Okay, right. As long as it's
not just fiber. It's a fiber drink.
Yeah. Maintain regularity.
You got to put a sealed thing like this, sealed up so we can't tell. Like, oh, it could be coffee. It looks great.
Yeah, we all know it. We all know it's whiskey. Come on, JD.
Well, actually, Metamucil can be mixed with whiskey, so you just never know. It could be vodka mucil.
There's whiskey.
I'm gonna call.
See, Floyd's got it right. Floyd's got a beer.
Right.
What are we drinking?
Guinness.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
he didn't have a single malt tonight.
I got old Rasputin. I got one old Rasputin left over in my fridge. I should break that open.
Now you got my taste buds going, Floyd.
People still drink that liquid bread? Holy shit!
Oh man, I've had a decent Guinness for. Oof.
Oh, I used to drink it a lot when I was in the army, but not anymore.
If we can carry on this conversation backstage, if I may say.
Yep.
I just want to go around, Hillary's, if you'd like to finish up, if there's anything you want to say on the topic or anything that's anything you thought of.
I think that the flood was most likely local. That when they say the world, they just mean, their little section of it, and that it was probably due to some sort of natural causes, and it was later attributed to a supernatural or divine cause.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful, Floyd.
It's a borrowed myth from other cultures.
Yeah, perfect. JD Kane. Doesn't have to be on that particular topic. It could be on anything.
I mean, it's false on its face. It's just so obviously false. You kind of have to scratch your head at anyone who thinks that there's any truth to it whatsoever. There's just so much wrong with it from a physics standpoint. From just everything we know about what we studied about the world, this did not occur. there are people who are so convinced that they will go online and argue with you, and they will be so confident, so ridiculously confident of something that is just patently absurd, that you just have to scratch your head like, is there any way to get through to these people? Now, clearly there are people who deconvert who eventually like, okay, yeah, I used to believe nonsense. I knew quite a few people in my real life, and probably maybe a couple people on the panel here probably maybe used to be evangelicals. I know quite a few, and like, yeah, I used to believe that stuff. And they have even the people who have deconverted have a hard time articulating why they held those beliefs in the first place. Like they have some reasons, but it still doesn't feel like I'm still like, but it's so insane. It's so obviously made up. Like there's so many angles you can go at to explain how it's clearly false, and yet they still believe it. I don't know. Maybe it could be me. I mean, I'm just never going to understand that. It's just not something. My brain is wired in a way that is just not something I can comprehend. That kind of mindset. So I'm still curious. Like how do you get that through your head? But at the end of the day, did not occur. There's just no way in hell. Not without a shitload of extra biblical miracles that are really just designed to hide what was done. And that's not in the Bible. You think if God's going to hide shit, we might mention it. Like, yeah, stuff happened. Not going to tell you about it.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Mark, over to you.
Oh, yeah. The amount of sets of evidence that shows that a global flood just never happened is so overwhelming. It's ridiculous. I think I mentioned to you before the show, Aaron Ra does a really good series on I think it's about 8 to 12 or something of different ways we know that the flood could not have happened. From geology to anthropology to archaeology to just sort of thing after thing after thing. It is, if you can keep sort of a bit of levity, it is quite funny pursuing theists down this route, because it's kind of like somebody trying to plug a dam with their finger and they put up one hole and then 5 others spring open kind of thing. Like, what did the animals eat? And then they say they all ate hay kind of thing. And then you talk about eagles that ate hay. And it's just, it actually is quite funny when you go down these things. And if nothing, I am a fan of causing cognitive dissonance to people. So, that sort of is amusing in itself. Of the hay-eating eagle is probably my favorite sort of excuse that's ever come up, because it is hilarious to think of an eagle's beak eating hay. It's just it makes me giggle every time. So it can be fun, but yeah, these are mythological stories. We understand them pretty well. They come from all cultures, and it's a much better explanation than this. If you will, the leaky boat explanation of sort of how these things happen. So
yeah,
but
that's
it is
a
a
good
bit
way
of
of
fun
putting
to
it.
talk about.
That's a really good analogy. Leaky boats. It's about as leaky as the story itself. Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Thank you, Mark. I really appreciate you having you on. And Jay, over to you, sir.
Well, yeah, from kind of going off what J.D. Kane said, as a former evangelical Christian, I have no idea how I actually, well, considering back then I was rubbish at justifying my beliefs, I have no idea why I even believe that, other than possibly saying, well, my parents and my elders told me, hey, all this stuff is true, and I just kind of went with it. As I've gotten older, obviously that went away. And yeah, I'm kind of in agreement with everybody here. It's just the story it's kind of a, lack of a better word, kind of a fantastic tale that we don't seem to have any real evidence to ever occurring, at least not on that kind of a grand scale, covering the mountains and all that shit. So that's pretty much all I have to say about it. I've had plenty of arguments about it, and I know one thing. Maybe I'll go back into my channel, and I have a video that was a debate between CRISPR and Jungle Jargon on the topic, and that was I moderated that, and that was a regular shitstorm.
All right. Well, if you could send me that, I will put it in the description down below.
I wonder if someone still has my 4 hours with Jungle Jargon that maybe went to drink a jar of Metamucil. So
possibly.
Wow. Yeah.
I've seen I've seen the clips from it, and that one is very special. Okay, let me put it that way. Okay, so yeah, please, Jay, just send me the link if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, I
Nadia.
just got to dig it out.
Okay, thank you, Nadia. Really good to see you. I'm glad you came in. I would just say, if you don't have to talk about flood, is there anything you'd like to mention about how things are going, or just what you're
Well,
into these days, or anything at all you want to mention?
well, I guess the number one thing is struggle against religion is a struggle for socialism.
Nice.
And of course, Six Opus Dei, one of whom is a literal handmade from one of the cults that inspired the book, is not a good sign. Never mind how bad I guess the outlook is for basically theocratic fascism.
Yeah.
And as far as the flood goes, I mean, I guess the point is that, you know, Utnapishtim was like this sort of like grand, like founder of the world, just kind of like pulled out of nowhere to, I guess, serve as an example of why immortality would actually suck if Gilgamesh had actually gotten it. And the authors of the Torah pretty much just missed the point and said, "Oh well, you know, there's this like great grand guy that we'll have to like compare Moses to, or not Moses, Noah to, and have him be like this grand founder of our river and not illustrate any of the point that it was meant to make." And the sort of like the grand labor of building the ark and having the I guess the sort of like the last seed of humanity or whatever was kind of like Utnapishtim's thing that he had to do to be deemed worthy of the immortality to be granted him by, I guess, Enki. So, it was kind of contrived mostly contrived as an excuse for that, as opposed to probably having any serious meaning at all. And when the Hebrews borrowed that, they just, I guess, superimposed just that, this is the whole like gold and silver, iron, etc. age type thing where things deteriorate over time. Hence the I guess Hebrew being equivalent of Utnapishtim, who was the golden age, grandest of all in earliest antiquity, was what they were trying to say, but they said it pretty badly.
Yeah.
So it's basically like shitty literature in a thematic sense. Also, the poetry is not very good, and obviously it's been used for terrible ends too. So it's kind of like, there's so many different reasons to throw it away and never let it out again. That that's pretty much where I stand with it.
Thank you. Yeah. I mean, I completely agree. And you said my finish as well. So over to you, Xbox, just to take us out, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah. I'll be quick. I'm glad at the panel we had tonight. A lot of the G+ crew has kind of shown up. That surprised me, especially on a biblical topic, which we really haven't done since we started.
Yeah.
And like, I usually don't get into like scriptural talk, and I'm glad and happily surprised that most of the people here kind of did Steelman as best they could. The story that nonsense and tried to make sense out of it, and have a discussion about it. I tried to get a couple Christians in, but either they were too busy or not around. So, but so I'm happily surprised at the panel we got.
Yeah.
The flood, I really don't. I mean, everybody said pretty much my thoughts or any thoughts I've had on it ever in the past, kind of thing. So I'm just grateful to everybody who showed up, and the conversation was really good.
Yeah. Once again, that echoes what I would say. Thank you, everybody, for showing up. We really appreciate it. And we will see everybody next week, hopefully, for another State of the Onion. And we'll let you know midweek what the Onion is. So thank you very much.